This is Dave Bortner, Freedom Boat Service. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary in business, and we happened to run across these cassette tapes that were produced as part of the Antique Motor Boating Symposium, March 31st through April 2nd of 1995 at the Mariners Museum. We thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to digitize these presentations by icons and luminaries of our hobby. We hope you enjoy listening to them and join us in celebrating our 10 years in business. Thanks. On this file, we're going to learn about lines and lofting from Ken Bassett. It's a little difficult to talk about a very three-dimensional topic like lines and lofting on an audio file, but it's still very interesting.
That I met him, I was riding in a boat down the St. Johns River, and I looked out of the corner of my eye, and this fast little boat came blowing by me at an incredible rate of speed with this gentleman driving it with a big smile on his face. And I thought, geez, that's a neat little boat. And had a chance later on to go out, look at it, and go through it, and get a chance to talk to him in depth. And from that time, I got to know and respect a lot of the work that Ken Bassett has done over the years. The little boat was Rascal. Many of you have probably seen the boat design advertised in Wooden Boat. There are a number of other boats that Ken has done over a long and varied career, starting with fiberglass canoes, interestingly enough. Ken also worked at Sierra Boat Company for a number of years, where he had honed his skills in the restoration field and learned a lot about the workings and design of some of the better, finer antique boats that we are aware of. He went on to write an article that explained to many of us the planking techniques that Charlie Gath developed using a router technology to make planking a boat much easier. And Ken put that in a very succinct way that made it possible for a lot of us to do things a lot better. From that, he developed some designs and started his own company, Onion River Boat Works. And at that location built some very interesting boats that many of us have seen, not the least of which is Miss Minneapolis, owned by Mike Bowman. There's not a lot more that you can say about Ken Bassett that can't be summed up with his philosophy on boat building and boat restoration. And one of the things that Ken said to me that I think is very, very true, and I alluded to it earlier in this weekend, is that you really can't have old boats if you don't have new wood boats. And part of the process of a new wood boat is getting it from paper, from a design, to an actual format and building the boat. And today you're going to learn some of that process from Ken. I'd like to introduce my friend, Ken Bassett. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming to an 8 o'clock class. I always had trouble with that. Had a lot of trouble with it right here 2 years ago. I'd like to cover three things this morning. One is using a canoe as an example, describe how to take the lines off an existing house. Second thing is, can everybody hear me? No. There's three things I'd like to do this morning. One is to use a canoe as an example of a boat that you can take the lines off of. The reason I choose a canoe is because everybody knows what it looks like. It's symmetrical fore and aft and also side to side. So if you can understand what a quarter of a canoe looks like, you basically have the whole thing. Okay? Second thing is using
the idea of patterning and transferring shapes, you should be able to build any part of a boat, whether it's missing or not, okay, or restore any shape. And one of the things that is kind of an Achilles heel to restorers sometimes is reconstructing a cutwater. Sometimes boats need a cutwater that don't have one. I use a launch as an example, where the owner was constantly getting wet when he drove because of the little half-inch flat on the stem of the boat would take the water and send it back about 12 feet right in his face. So a cutwater can eliminate that. Some of these runabouts are minus a cutwater. So knowing what measurements to take, even if you don't build it yourself, knowing what measurements to take and give to a fabricator, okay, can make life very easy for you. A third thing sort of appeared yesterday when Wilson Wright gave his presentation and used transparencies of the lines of a 19-foot racing runabout from the museum. There was a couple of interesting things that flashed by right in front of me, and I think I can use them. And since we've talked a lot about that type of boat, I think I can sort of bring it back and show you how all of this relates to plans that are in the museum and the racing runabout in particular. Lines and lofting seem like a pretty esoteric subject, and I guess they can be, but in my estimation, so can finding an ammeter needle, and so can be some of the research that people go through. Yesterday, when Wayne and Gary and Pete were here, it was a good indication of the depth of knowledge of a certain, well, not a certain, I mean a whole range of things. My interest is the boat up until the owner takes delivery. In my mind, there are two different worlds. My world is everything up to launching. And then after that, if I did everything right, the boat takes off on another life. And I've only found really time to get involved with everything up until that time. So, yeah, it can be esoteric, but I think it's part of, it's certainly a big part of boat work, boat understanding, history. It's a terribly ancient, this boat building stuff is a terribly ancient craft, isn't it? About as old as it gets after the wheel. So, in a way, what could be so difficult? It's gone on and on and on. You can build boats from chunks of wood. You can, you see all the half models that shipbuilders used for years, how they transmitted that information to a shop. I think it's a source of endless amusement, and it's certainly my preference and profession. And I'm aware that you people know more than you think you know. So just before we start, I'm going to try to condense all of this, and then we're going to expound on it. So I have my yellow canoes right here, and I have a knife here somewhere, and I want to show you a little bit about hull lines. It's a good thing I had a yellow canoe, I know that. There's only a few certain lines that are important. And if you're working on your own boat, you're going to have to deal with these lines. When you take a boat apart and it gets all flimsy, that's the time that you're going to have to make sure it's aligned. It doesn't seem right to take the boat apart and be so anxious to be putting wood back on the boat that you don't know whether it's crooked or not. A lot of these boats have become misshapen because of a trailer, because of improper storage, because of just plain old neglect, because of hard use, anything. So when you've got this boat to restore, it would be nice to try to come back to the original shape. you can build in all the problems of the boat right over again if you don't stop and do this. You have a water line generally to go by, and that is the white stripe around, which is the blue top. But if the boat has been trimmed in a certain way, I use a Coronado as an example where the torque is so bad that it's not uncommon to find people who put lead on one side and then adjusted the water line. So boats change, the look of the boat changes. You've got a stem that you can plumb. You've got a water line in the back. You've got symmetry on the side. How deep is the chine below the water line side to side? There are all kinds of ways to measure. There's a couple of, we think of this as a canoe. Everybody got that? One important line is right down the center. It's like they were making banana splits. Okay, the center line of that canoe is right down the center, okay? The center line is just, it's not like a line, it's like a plane, okay? It goes all the way through the boat, okay? And actually splits it in half, a right and a left, okay? Okay, we'll take another canoe. We'll take another canoe. This is a canoe out of the water, okay? And this is a canoe in the water, okay? This is the part below the water. That right there is called the water line, okay? Just like the white stripe on your boat. The water line goes all the way through the hull. Now, in boats, there are a number of water lines. There's as many water lines as there are lines in your TV picture screen. Just an infinite number. We only use 3, 4, 5. Okay? I think the 19th Racing Runabout might use 3. All they are for is to be a horizontal reference plane all the way through the boat. But that's the water line. Okay? Now take another canoe. I showed you one view. One view is like this, where you look at the boat in profile. You have to see that view, okay? The second one I showed you is the boat from above or below. You have to see that view. The third view that you have to see is what it looks like through the middle, okay? So, up at the bow, it looks like that. Back at the cockpit, it looks like that. And the seat back, it's got a slant on it. It looks like that, okay? And when the transit has a slope on it, or a curve, or something like that, it looks like that in profile, and that on the end. You have to see all those three views to be able to visualize or transfer or build a boat. There's so many shapes involved that you want to make each view as simple as you can, okay? So now, I'll go over the idea of taking lines from a canoe, and I'll try to make this apply to Francis, did that? Oh, here it is. I'll try to make the presentation relate to some of your runabouts. If you got any questions, the lights will be dim. Just blurt it out, okay? Just stop me. So we'll look at the slides first. This is how I saw this particular canoe. I will publicly thank the owner for not only having me do the work on the boat, but also allowing me to take lines and also to make it possible for me to do this presentation. That canoe belongs to John Clark in Kentucky. Very, very interesting boat. That was in its basically original form. Tired, but still very, very nice. When I took all the fastenings out of the boat to rebuild it, I only broke one brass screw. The decks on the boat are not only matched one-piece wood fore and aft, but also side to side. They're 4 butterflied pieces of mahogany about 14 inches wide. Has very extreme ends, a very small cockpit. That would be called a pleasure canoe. It dates around, somewhere around 1920, pre-1920. It has a lot of tumble home in it, which is a hull characteristic, which means that it's very wide at the waterline and then becomes fairly narrow at the sheer. Type of boat is a little bit up in the air. I claim, or I believe, that the serial numbers indicated a style that Old Town Canoe did, but it predates Old Town Canoe recording their numbers. There are also a couple other builders that built canoes like this. I don't know whether you know some of the history of this, but up until, 1890, 1903, the canoe was by far the most popular form of pleasure boating in this country. If you see old postcards, old photographs of municipal parks, it was just wall-to-wall canoes. It came over. The idea of pleasure boating in a canoe came from Europe. The canoe designs that we use in this country largely came from native North Americans, but the idea of pleasure boating is a Western European idea. And then practically overnight, the canoe fell out of favor because of the bicycle. That's how it goes. Hardware is nickel-plated. It had a top on it, too. Maybe you'll see part of that, maybe you won't. There's not many boats that can be so simple and so subtle and so beautiful as a canoe, and also so versatile. They can handle an incredible amount of heavy water, as well as be perfectly quiet and fast and all those good things. And that's what the skin of a canoe looks like when you take it off. Canvas-covered canoes were constructed that way to be flexible, lightweight, and waterproof. Guides that use canoes to work with, I'm familiar with them from northern Maine, and I've been on a number of long-distance trips. And one memorable one was I had a 20-footer with 400 pounds on board and about a 70-inch paddle and a pole. And we had to go down Chase Rapids, which is about an hour's worth of hard work. And we sunk the canoes for about 3 hours before we went down the rapids. And this idea of varnishing the inside of a canoe is a total pleasure idea. It doesn't help the canoe at all. It makes it look great. But part of the reason for having a wood canvas canoe is to make it flexible. And I mean flexible. So we sunk the canoes for about 3 hours until they got good and soft, headed down the rapids, and of course you can miss most of the rocks, but you can't miss all of them. And even that 20-footer with 400 pounds on board, when I'd go over a rock, you'd hear this, and you could look down at the bottom of the boat, and it was coming up distorted and distended. It came up about 5 inches. And you roll over the rock, and that's fine. The repair kit for this kind of trip, it consists of gauze and ambroid cement. So you got a leak in the boat. You go find it. Pull the boat out of the water, dry it off in the sun, little ambroid cement on your thumb, a couple layers of gauze, dries very quickly, you're back in business. You see the boat set up upside down on a kind of a ladder frame, and you see a U-shaped form that surrounds the boat easily at the widest point. If this were a 30-foot Fay Bowen, it would be the same thing. If it was a racing rudder, it was the same thing. Large, but terribly simple. You'll see the uprights at each end. Again, you have to know the center line of the boat. You'll see a piece of string that runs down right here, right over the top of the boat, right down to the next upright at the other end. And this little stick here is going down, and it's keeping track of the center line wherever this U-shaped form moves along the boat. Here's the center line of the boat, right here, and this string is laying right on the center seam of the planking. This line is stretched tightly. It's in the air. It's about, well, what, an inch, maybe above. That's called the baseline. Any drawing that you see is going to have a baseline. In order for you to know how high things are, you got to have some point to start with. That baseline could be on the floor, and the boat could be up here, but think of what's practical. If you got a garage and you're trying to If you're trying to go to your friend's house and say, I got to know where your keel is. I think my keel, I know it's got some wrinkles in it. I got to find out why. When you find somebody who's got the same boat, sitting on a trailer, on a rough floor, you've got to erect a baseline. And it could be just a string. Drive stakes in the ground, there you go. You measure up at regular intervals, and you get a curve. So you go back to your boat, transfer those, and you get a picture of what maybe a better keel than yours is. And then you can decide what to do about it. It's also important to level the boat side to side. If you don't, you can see what happens. You get the shape all right, but you don't get it relative to anything. You have to know plumb and level in the beginning, and that's virtually all you have to do. If you got a runabout and you hang a plumb bob off the transom and a plumb bob off the stem, and you sight down the middle, and in the middle of the boat the keel's going this way, at least that tells you something, that something is desperately out of symmetry. Also, a lot of stems on these boats are twisted off. If you hang a plumb bob from the stem head, it's a good possibility that when you look down that string, the forefoot is nowhere to be found. It's also possible that when you hang a string off the transom, that the rudder is offset by a half, 3/4 of an inch. I'm just curious, how many people have ever done this with a boat that they own? Okay, that's about a third of what it should be. Okay, you are going to decide the length, you're going to know how long the boat is. It's nice to take it, if it's 16 feet long, do it every 2 feet. In the museum drawings that we're going to see later, you'll see some very odd numbers. There's a reason for that, but make life easy for yourself. We're only dealing with half the boat, 16 feet long. We only have to worry about 8 feet. Okay, if we do one every 2 feet, there's 4 stations. It just doesn't take that long, and you get to see the shape. I think I might have used 16 inches. Okay, this is a note that just says there's a hull symmetry, ribs 10 and 14. Okay, that would be this one right here and this one right here. And the reason I use those two is because that's where a plank ends. You go over to the other side and see if the plank ends in the same place. It gives you an indication of whether the hull was built symmetrically. Back to the U-shaped form. These are strips of 1/8 inch cedar sharpened on one end just to make a pointer out of it. And they're stapled all across this U. And the U is clamped to the strong back here at some of these cross pieces. Okay? This is a strong back I use to do an awful lot of building on. A ladder type frame is very good for planking in general because you get to put a clamp anywhere you want. If you're trying to do a planking operation on a flat table, you're going to run out of places to clamp to. If you've got a ladder type frame, you can glue, you can cut with a saw, you can clamp anywhere, and it's usually long and narrow and level. All we're doing is making the pieces of wood touch the hull, staple it. You go over to the lofting board, which you've already prepared, which is basically a white painted piece of homosoder plywood that's the size of the basement window that would be required to get the boat out. Okay? On this lofting board, we already have the center line and a water line, the old XY axis from 9th grade geometry. It's all the same. We need to know height, we need to know wide. There's a push pin at the end of every one of those little pointers, okay? Please note, I haven't gotten a ruler anywhere near this operation. I have a theory about rulers, is mostly they're useless. It's, isn't it harder to remember 7 and 13/16, and try to remember that for 5 minutes? Okay, just a little detail here that shows that the distance between the center line and this is the half width of the keel. And the distance from, if this is where the keel meets the hull, and this one right here, that's the height of the keel, the external keel on a canoe. So with a simple little piece of wood, you can get some very precise measurements. If you do this on a runabout, you would probably put these little pointers at the plank seam. So now, at the same time you've gotten the shape of the hull, you've also got the plank layout. You can use some form of flexible batten. This is a store-bought batten. It's an engineering tool. Art supply stores, drafting places, all sell these things. Again, I use 5/8 steel push pins. And it's the old connect the dot. Now you move the U and do it again. Take all the little pointer pieces off the boat, move the U, put them all back on again. Now, at some point, you have a deck to worry about in a boat like this. This is the turn, okay? Then all we want to see is the shape of the deck up to the center line. Go back to your board, transfer it, keep track of the center line, keep track of the base line, so you put this U back on the board the same way. We move forward. This time, the boat's gotten a lot smaller. Sticks are the same size. We just put a cleat in here. It doesn't matter whether it's cockeyed or what it is. The key part is down here where the center line goes right through the hull down here at the center line of this building frame, and this piece of string. This is perfectly plumb. Just shows how quickly this can all be done. Got to keep track of the center line again. We've just added this cleat here to give me something to put the pointers on. This is the lofting board here on the other side. Here's the skin of the canoe we saw. Doesn't take up that much space either.
You use a new lofting board each time, then, or you put them all superimposed on it?
They're all superimposed on each other. The shape of the boat is changing. So you really won't have a very crowded drawing. There are times that you will, and you'll see this in the runabout transparencies, but in this you won't. And I think I have a transparency of this whole lofting, which I'll show you in a little bit. But use the same piece of wood or the same lofting board for every boat, basically. Now, if the boat requires more than a sheet of plywood, well, just go make a basement window bigger than a sheet of plywood. This shows how the shape of the stem is recorded. A stem, to me, goes all the way back to the first station, wherever it is, because what you're trying to do is connect the body plan of the boat. Body plan is the slices of bread, okay? You'll see that written down. But you've got to connect the front shape of the boat back to some other part that you've already recorded, because it's easier, and there's not much guesswork. Same view from the other side, and you'll see we've recorded the height of the stem. Now we've recorded some of the shape leading into the first frame. I didn't have any marks on the hull to indicate station 1, but I can tell you that station 1 is right at that mark, okay? And I can tell you that it's 16 inches from there to there, okay, because I took that 8 feet and divided it evenly, and it came out to 16 inches. Everybody kind of getting the hang of this?
Is there any measurement from point to point?
No, none. All we're trying to do is transfer shape. No measurement necessary. The only measurement necessary really is how long the boat is and where the stations are. Those are measured. After that, it's all shape transfer. I'm trying to think of something on a runabout that you'd use this for. Deck beams, great example. The deck beams has gone to hell. Somebody's dropped something on them. They're distorted. The king plank is somebody lifted the boat, and the bottom of the lifting ring is old, and it ripped the king plank up and took out the deck beams with it. And I know wherever I speak because I've seen that kind of job before. So you restore the shape. You do it with battens or whatever. I had a boat to do one time. It was a Century. The roof had fallen in, and all of the deck beams were broken, and the hull had splayed apart just after the windshield, about 9 inches. And so the whole shape of the boat had to come back. And I remember taking some shapes off other boats and checking the measurements, because if you don't have the hardware in mind, if you don't have the dimensions of the windshield in mind, you're going to get a bad surprise. Yes, I saw. On a canoe that was 16 feet long, and I mentioned that the symmetry of a canoe is not only fore and aft, but it's also side to side. So if you understand a quarter of the boat, chances are that's all you need. Now, when I showed you the slide that had the symmetry of the planking on it, ribs 10 and 14, go side to side of the boat, and you begin to see that the boat is in fact symmetrical fore and aft. Now, not all canoes are. I must tell you that. There are a lot of canoes that really do not have a symmetrical waterline, so that's not always the case. Okay, I have a transparency of this, but here's the one piece of wood that has all of the stations that I recorded. This is the center line. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You only need to see half the boat because of symmetry. We have half hull models. We have half breadth measurements, which is another word for width. But you only have to know half the width. There's a lot of mirror imaging in boats, if you haven't already figured that out. If you make a cockpit corner that's round, it's got compound angles on one surface that meets, let's say, the dashboard or the dashboard area, another compound angle that meets the combing side. Before you fasten it and then walk over to the other side to do it, take that same piece of wood, walk over to the other side of the boat, turn it upside down, see if you're anywhere close. If you make a piece for one side of the boat, use it as a pattern, go over and see what it looks like on the other side. And you don't have to keep going back to zero to start again, like, oh, I got that side done. Use the same piece. This is not a good slide. I have these on the overhead projector. Now the boat's right side up. Do the same thing. Got to find the center line. You can put a level across this area of the boat. Any cockpit area will probably do. In a runabout with, the hatches off, you could check, the height of the hatch landings. Use the rear cockpit, put a level across it, see if it's correct side to side. Use the water line across the transom. Use the chine. Okay, the chine could be more accurate. The chine to chine, if you put a level across there and you say, well, I can't do that, my transom's curved. Nail some sticks on the outside. Tape something. Get it out so that you can measure that. You can use the engine stringers. The engine stringer is the first part of the boat to be laid up in new construction. Always was, probably always will be. You'd have to assume that somebody wanted them level fore and aft and level side to side. They've got to put an engine there. It's got to be aligned. All the cockpit structure comes off the stringers generally. Goes from the stringers to the side. The stringers should be a good point of reference for a lot of runabout work. If they're all hacked up, you could say the first week you work on the boat, oh, I can't use those. But you could also make them right, and then you can always use them. Right here, we're trying to find the shape of the deck line. So this is a plumb line in the center of the boat. This follows the string, which is down the center, and it's just resting here, right at the stem head. It's not totally necessary, but what I was trying to do was make a mark on this piece of wood that corresponded to where that frame was. Some of the reason that you would record lines is pure history, just for the sake of recording. If you have an opportunity to do a boat, I think you should record as many details as you can, as many pertinent details, and take pictures. Even if you do nothing with it, it's nice to just record pictures for the sake of, or record the structure of a boat. The boat gets sold, all that stuff goes with it, maybe. In my notes, I say that it's the owner's responsibility. A lot of builders know that they should be doing this. It was years before I did. There doesn't seem to be enough time, even 2 days, there just doesn't seem to be enough time to do this. But once the boat leaves you, and you've already had it set up level to be able to work on, once it leaves you, you've missed the opportunity. Once the hardware is on it, you've missed. When the boat is basically in its worst condition, it's a beautiful time to align it and record the shape. There's countless boats out there that, everybody loves. Nobody's got any idea what they look like. In my outline, I said something about insurance policy. It's got something to do with if the boat is ever lost. I mean, you can feel real possessive about your boat. Oh, I don't want anybody else to have one of mine. Well, fine. And yours burns up next week. Now nobody's got one. And I think the idea of being possessive about your type of boat, I don't know. I feel it's just a little short-sighted. Where would we be if Howard Chappell hadn't done what he did? It's in volumes and volumes of books. How do people learn? Something has got to be transmitted. Smithsonian is filled with lines of boats that people have taken. And You get to see the good ideas and you get to see the bad ideas. So, I really think that part of owning a boat should be recording it. Now, in many cases, it's already been done, and it's not necessary. In some cases, the boat is just awful, never worked right, killed 3 people, always falls off the trailer. Bad boat. Don't take the line. I grew up on the coast of Maine, and one of the things that you found out early on was that fishermen would go way, 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 way out to sea in the smallest of boats, and some wouldn't be back. And one of the features of the boat that was revered was if the fisherman was found in his boat, washed ashore or wrecked or something, dead or whatever, but if he was found in his boat, the boat was revered. And if he was found or not found and the boat was found, if the boat, in other words, didn't bring him back, the boat was burned. Interesting. Now we take the same cedar pointers, find the shape of the center line of the deck. Now once we've got that done, let's find the curve. What does that curve look like? And what does this look like compared to that? This is just a piece of plywood with a slot cut out of it, and it rests on the gunnels, and draw the line. And you can see all the deck beams are the same. Gives you an indication it was probably a production boat. And he used the same shape over and over and over and over.
Then how did you put that line on? Was it right against the...
Just a pencil. And I traced against this beam right here. Just drew the line on the plywood. Bruce Barnard has discovered a long time ago that the radiuses of Chris graphs are virtually identical. Also discovered a number of similarities between 24s and 26-foot Chris graphs. If you were in the production boat business, you would not reinvent the wheel every time it came time to build a boat. Again, one of the transparencies from the museum will point out the relationship between 1947 and 1955, where the same drawing was used for 2 completely different reasons. Now, if you're trying to describe this curve that you just got, I'm not going to carry this piece of plywood around, but I've got to record it. It's very simple. This distance, point to point, was 12 inches. I divided into 4 parts of 3 inches each, and measured the vertical height. That's all it takes. Then I looked at the relationship between the various heights of these, and I saw that they were all 5/8 of an inch. This is just further proof that this is all the same curve used in a number of places, which basically fools you and makes you think the shape is changing. But that, my friends, is boats. Interesting little feature here, an aside to taking lines for sure. One of the thwarts is fastened down through the inside structure of the rail or the gunnels of the boat. I have bored down into this piece of wood. This piece was applied, this triangular piece was applied after the seat was fastened, so another indication of production building. If you were producing boats and you had to plank a boat before noon, you aren't worried about what the guy 30 years down the road is going to think of you. And sometimes my answer is nobody's thought of me, so I'm not going to think of anybody else. Not quite that harsh, but basically the same. They had to make a living. I have to make a living. There's only so much planning for the next take-apart session. If you really think that's important and you want to build boats that'll come apart easily, that's absolutely fine. Some of the laminating things that we've done, you are going to use new tools to take them apart. And that's all. There was a time before there was no fiberglass Corvettes, and people said, oh, how are we going to do that? I mean, cars are metal. We all know that. But somehow we figured out the tools that it would take to restore fiberglass cars. Same thing with boats, I think. Back to one of those holes. Inside, I looked at these from back there, and it's very difficult to see, but there's a flathead slotted carriage bolt right there, but the slot is filled up with something. Here's the slot. It's filled up with something shiny, which my drill bit hit when I went down. What it's filled up with is 2 finish nails bent over into the slot, okay? Which is a great fastening idea. If you're going to cover up the head of that bolt and fasten the thwart underneath, and over time the thwart loosens up and you want to tighten that, it'd be real nice to not have that head of that bolt be spinning around. So production or not, there was some planning to how can we take the thwart out, how can we, without taking it apart. This saw cut right here, the deck pieces were overlapped, and somebody took a saw and went right down through both of them and landed in the boat. So one saw cut 2 pieces of wood. That's very production kind of thinking. This is the boat when it was finished. Looks about the same that it did before it was done. This is John and Clark and his wife Kay, and they're both pretty tall glasses of water, so you can see how small the cockpit gets. But that was a courting canoe of the 1917 to 1920, I believe. Are there any questions on that so far? Kevin Martin builds canoes. I'm not sure whether they're all lap strake canoes or whether they're canvas canoes. I don't know that this type of boat is being built. Yeah, I happen to think this is a hull that would be absolutely suitable for a 24-foot by 4-foot electric pleasure canoe. They did this in England many years ago, but we have our own canoes that are indigenous to this country, and I think the style is very pleasing. That's another reason for taking lines. Maybe you aren't going to copy the boat, but maybe there's a reason to say, well, 10 years from now, maybe that was a good idea, it's worth saving, maybe we're going to do this or that or whatever. But I take lines from a boat, take a look at it, the scale disappears, it could be any size, it could be a cradle boat. I think that's it for this subject. I said there were historical considerations. Taking the lines off a boat would enable you to build a half model of your own boat. That's a very easy, inexpensive way to learn about boats. If you have trouble seeing a certain shape, I guarantee that you'll have trouble on a certain part of the model, but you're working with a piece of wood that's, if it were inch to the foot, you got a 20-foot boat, you got a 20-inch block of wood. If you think you have trouble sanding, or if you think you have trouble restoring a shape, build a half model. And if you have trouble at the transom, chances are you're going to have trouble on the real boat because it's an eye thing. And so all that tells you is just be careful. Just go slow. And plus, if you build a half model, you got something to hang on the wall. For thousands of years, you built the half model and then built the boat. Totally acceptable way of doing it. You can float a half model. You can find the water line. You can tow a half model. Not a half model. You can tow a full-size model. It's a great sales tool, always was. I know that there was a half model of the Yacht America done way before the full-size boat. It's a very pleasing thing to live with. Some of you might know that there's one of Guy Lombardo's, well, I guess his largest commuter called Tempo belongs to the Chrysley family, and we've discussed lofting part of the boat to rebuild right off to the side, okay, and then bring a crane in and move the new part onto the old part, or vice versa. But the ability to do that is it's ancient, and people do this in repairing big projects. I was contracted last summer to fly out to Seattle to take the lines off Miss America 8, and then come back and use the contemporary accounts of the day to design Miss America 7, which does not exist. That boat is currently being built. It's in frame. So we can take, again, something from history and say, well, it was just like it except for this and that, which is all written down here, and the measurements this and that. So you can take what you do know and fill in the historical blanks, and now Miss America 7 is able to be built again. There will be a growing market in new boats and replicas. Some boats wear out. That's all there is to it. Gary Sherb's Prowler is one of them. Had a long, illustrious life, but it is wearing out. There's only so much rebuilding that you can do. The hull basically is a very simple design. We've taken the lines off the old hull. Maybe someday it'll be built again. If you're going to do this, even with your own boat, I suggest that you have a general commitment to accuracy and authenticity. Just try to do the best job you can. Is this something that you can do by yourself? You're going to need help. The boat can be done right side up very easily. The museum is certainly full of a lot of Chris-Craft things, which may or may not be like your boat. So try not to mix and match. Okay, if you're going to do this, take the thing that you do know right in front of you. That's what you're measuring. If you add a deck from another drawing, say, oh, well, I know it's got this deck, so I just use that. From my point of view, that's mixing apples and oranges. Try not to be cryptic. Write complete sentences when you're doing your work so that somebody else can read, or actually so you can read them. You'd be surprised how much you forget in a month. I do. Just try to be clear about it. A notebook works really well. Let's see. When we look at the Chris-Craft plans, I'll tell you how to understand a little bit more about the lines. There's a reading list in this handout. I have forgotten one thing, which is important, and that is, I think around issue 90, 91, 92, 93, somewhere in there of Wooden Boat is a two-part lofting article. Lofting is how you understand it. I bought plans from Mystic Seaport in the 70s. I could not understand what a table of offsets was. There was no one around to teach me. And I studied, and I must have made 20 half models from Mystic Seaport plans before I ever built a boat. I think maybe I was scared to build a boat. But I wanted to do it, and I figured, well, we'll just practice with the small stuff first. And basically, a big boat is just a blown-up version of a small boat. The lines reveal themselves to you. There's no other way I can explain it. There's no real easy answer. Likewise, there's no easy answer to all the little nuances of engines. There's no easy answer to how do I get, how do I get this exhaust manifold repaired? I went to this guy and it didn't work out. You got to go through a lot of stuff. Questions are very cheap, and the more questions you ask, the better off you are. Okay, now I'll show you the canoe drawings from the overhead transparencies. Okay. On the right, you see the same thing I tried to take a picture of. These are the stations. The keel, you only need to see the keel in one view. You don't have to keep stacking the keels up. It just gets confusing. But you see how the shape changes? Now, this is directly from the boat. It was a very fair boat. Back to the XY of 9th grade geometry. Okay? The center line is vertical. The baseline is horizontal. Back to the banana. The water line is right here. There's an infinite number of water lines. The next one I want to use is here, and the next one I want to use is there, simply because they're 6 inches apart. You'd like to have the lines that you do use go through an area of the boat that has a maximum hull shape change. Okay? If I wanted to measure the width of the boat, it would be real nice to have a 90-degree crossing right here. If I want to measure this right here, do you see when the lines cross at a severe angle that it could be anywhere? Okay. Water lines go this way. Buttock lines, don't ask me where that word came from, B-U-T-T-O-C-K, are parallel to the center line, also an equal distance out. So what you have when you look at a body plan, which this is the slice of bread, what you have is a grid. And it's back to the popular science, popular mechanics plans that they had a funny shape, whether it was a windmill that you were trying to make or a rudder to some boat, and they had a little grid, remember? And down at the bottom it said 2-inch squares, and you were supposed to draw your 2-inch squares and produce the same shape. It's basically the same concept. Okay, just because of the shape of the piece of paper, this is the deck layout. Okay, can you see that this is the stem head here? I call it the apex. The shear drops down here. The height of the deck is right here. These are the deck beams, but the paper wasn't big enough. So I cut it here and continued it back to the end of the deck. So there were 6 deck beams. Okay, here's the stem of the boat. Again, we've got the same grid, except I don't need to see all the lines. I just need to know where certain ones cross. This is a continuation up there. And that's a continuation here, okay? And that's all that means, but it's the same grid. I need to know how far in and how far up that point is. I'm going to go up 9 5/8 right here to this water line, and it's going to be 0, and that's where this stem touches the vertical line, okay? At each end of the boat, you have a perpendicular. The back is called the aft perpendicular. The bow is called the forward perpendicular. And the stem has gone through station 1. Okay, so now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the other plan, and we've got the stem connected. Okay. I want to turn the lights on for just a second. Okay, everybody stand up, shake it out for a minute. Really? I'm going to keep going, but just relax for a minute. I'm sorry? And the answer, Bill, is no. The only full-size drawings I made of that boat were the body plan, because once you have a grid, you can produce the other two views. I'm trying to keep this process just a little bit simple, okay? Measurement technique to build a cutwater, okay? Francis, would you turn the lights down, please? This is the subject boat. It was about, it's a Johnson launch. This is the launch that the owner got continually wet. It doesn't take much. If you were all to take the cutwater off your runabout, you'd get wet too. It's fact. Launches are even more so because they have generally a plumb stem. But when the water hits here, and this was a piece of half-inch, half-round, okay? But it to a boat, that's a pretty blunt surface going 20 miles an hour. So there's a little stream of water that comes right up over the top, and it lands right here. Okay? And after 15 years of originality, he was just tired of being wet. So he said, I got to have a cutwater. I like the ones that are on the Fay Bones. Can you build me one of those? Okay, where's the boat? Oh, it's 30 miles, turn left. It's in my boathouse. Okay. So the idea is you got to go take measurements of this boat and go off and build a serious piece of metal, come back and fit it on the boat. First cutwater I did, I cut the pieces on each side, hired a welder to come in the shop. Boat catches on fire. I'm yelling and screaming. He goes home mad. I don't want to do this anymore. Go find somebody else. So I said, I got to figure out another way. You people struggle with who you go to ask. So do I. So do we. So does everybody. Okay? So all I did was round the wood, paint it black, and put the cutwater on. It's perfect. Okay? So I don't have any light over. Could we get a little light on in this area where the blackboard is, Francis? No, because I'm going to be doing that too. I'll try to draw it so you can see it. There's the stem of the boat. There's the stem of the boat. There's the stem head, and there's the deck. Somewhere we got to do a cutwater. You got to decide what kind of shape you would really like to have, or maybe you go find somebody else's boat, but you got to start with something. Faybow and cutwater might come in kind of narrow at the top, gets fairly wide, and then drops down, okay? Faybow and cutwater is very beautiful. So you can do that with a piece of masking tape or anything. You go cut that shape out on a piece of 4mm plywood or any kind of substantial pattern that's easy to cut. Don't forget, the stem of the boat has a flat dimension, okay, on the front. So when we look down the front of the boat, here's the stem head right here. The boat takes off from there. You've got a flat surface right here. If you're adding a cutwater, don't forget it's going to come out into here to the center line. Okay, so your pattern is going to go past the end of the boat, because when these two pieces meet, okay, now you got a different stem of the boat, basically. It's going to be this right here, I can tell you, and let's just call this A, okay, and this is A. And down in here, it's called B, which is about the forefoot of the boat, and you're going to find that the angle has changed considerably. It's gotten much sharper. So the front of the cutwater, okay, is out away from the boat, and it's going to be coming like this, okay? It's going to be out here, and then it's going to go way out here because you got more of an angle. And then it's going to come back in here. Now your pattern, just ferret in the way you like it. If you say that's not original, well then that's a philosophical consideration that you have to deal with. If you've got somebody else's cutwater, I suggest before you say, oh, I need a cutwater just like this, if it's possible, take that cutwater, put it on your boat, and see if it is just like this. Okay? These are probably $300 to $600 items, so, you know, it's nice to measure twice and cut once, so to speak. Decide on what your fastening pattern is going to be. There's many ways you can do that, but you know what the fastening pattern was for most cutwaters. It's basically an evenly spaced countersunk oval head or flathead screw. Okay, so you see the patterns that are laying on the pieces of brass. That was 16th inch brass. It's nice when the right side looks like the left side, but if it doesn't, well, you get to know something about the guy that built the boat. And it happens, and it happens. It's also nice when the center of the cutwater is right in a straight line that goes down the center of the boat. How many people go up to somebody else's trailer and look at the cutwater? You know? There's a lot of sidewalk superintendents out there. Now, on that drawing, you'll see that the boat gets, on the slide, the boat gets wide back here. It's starting to have a shape, okay? And this basically is worn off, but I can just about tell you when the boat was new, it was a flat, okay? So we've got the bottom of the cutwater is spreading because the keel is flat. So a lot of cutwaters have a little triangular piece that's flat, right? Have you ever seen that? Some are bent over and rounded. Others have a third piece that's applied. In this case, it was going to be a third piece that was applied, and it was going to be a triangular piece. It was going to be 1.5 inches at one end, and it's going to be 0 at the other, and it starts right there, and it goes all the way to here. So right back at the bottom of the cutwater, it was 1.5 inches wide. You see what happens if you were to just continually keep bringing this to a point, is all of a sudden the cutwater is going to be very deep down here at the bottom, and what you're trying to do is pare this into the hull. When you take measurements off a boat, okay, let's see, let's just call this 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Now, we'll get rid of the pattern. We get rid of the pattern, we come back to our boat, and we got a piece of masking tape here, or we've drawn a line on the hull from the pattern that we made. And we're looking at 1, 2, 3, and so on. There could be, in this boat, I think it was 9. Okay, but it was a tall boat. At 1, it's going to look something like this. The cutwater is going to come back to there. We need to know this width straight across, okay? And we need to know that dimension, but we already have that from our pattern, okay? So this will be 1. We come down to 2. It's basically the same. Maybe it's up in here somewhere. Okay, so there's 2. Same drawing. Down around 3, it's starting to change a little bit. Okay, we've got a longer pattern piece, and it's gotten a little bit wider. This will get real obvious to you the minute you start really doing this on your own boat. So this is 3, and so on and so on. And you're going to come up if you say, well, I got to put some blocks of wood in here to hold it, that the block of wood is basically going to look like this. Okay, so when you remount this piece of wood, you've got the angle and you got the width, and you got holes in the pieces that you're trying to get welded, and you screw the brass pieces or the stainless pieces into this wood, which already sets the angle for you. cut it out on a bandsaw. Then we're back to the sheet brass, cutting it out on a bandsaw. That's a wood bandsaw with a metal cutting blade.
And how would you take those measurements with a caliper?
With an outside caliper, okay? What do they look like? Okay? And you got it on the other side of the boat, okay? So then you come over here and you lay it out, okay? And that's the distance that you're after. The only distance that you know is where the cutwater touches the hull, right back here at this edge. You got a 3/4 inch piece of pine or something, and you know the angle the cutwater makes, you know the bevel that piece of wood has to be. And if you stack the two pieces of metal, you can grind them and fare them and do whatever you have to do. And you can center punch for the holes and so on. I used a piece of fine line tape on the aft edge of that cutwater. There was 3/8 of an inch tape, which sets the fastening line all along that edge of the tape. And then center punch them and drill them and countersink them. And that's drilling. This is what it looked like after it was first brazed. Brazed, is that the right word? Welded? Brass, brazed. I'll show you another view, but it's very rough, and it all has to be filed down and ground down, and you're going to go through, you're going to probably find voids. So plan on 2 trips back to the fellow that did the welding. Just plan on it, okay? 3 if you're unlucky, 4 if you got the wrong guy to do the welding. Okay, I'm going to need a little less light up here. Thank you. Okay, here are the blocks of wood in the back. Okay, see this one, and 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 this one. They don't have to be touching each other. But the more ways you have to anchor this piece of metal, the better. Anytime you have to go to a subcontractor, a welder, plater, an engine person, the better prepared the piece is, the more seriously they're going to take you, I guarantee. And if you want pieces polished or plated and you mount them on pieces of wood, they might not get lost, they might not get dropped and dented, the holes in the hardware won't get oval for somebody freehanding it on a very high-powered buffing wheel, and they're going to take you seriously that if you've gone this far to prepare the work for them, they're going to give you a good job. So, in this case, that provides a handle for all of the polishing. I was doing that. But when you take it to the plater, he's got a handle too, because undoubtedly they're going to buff it themselves. And I don't know whether you've ever seen a buffing operation, but it's a man killer. And it can take a piece of metal and just throw it right anywhere. Throw it into the next county. If you got something to hang on to, it's a lot safer. The triangular piece I talked about earlier is now, it's long, and it's just running off here. So we really haven't started to finish this thing yet. Okay, and that's what it looks like when it was, first assembled. Now, I did go back. I found I got into some holes when I was filing. And so you go back, gets filled again, you file some more, you sand some more. You sand cross with 220, and then you cross with 400, and then you cross with 600, and then you start your buffing process. And if you've still got scratches, you back up and do it again. And then you get a shiny cutwater. This is the boathouse where it was going to be installed. It's the same building form. All it was that weld was filed down and sanded and then polished. That's all there was to it. That's the Mount Washington in the background. This is up on Lake Winnipesaukee. That's how tall the cutwater was. There's a goodly piece of metal. I don't know how much it weighed, but I think the cost of materials was somewhere around $100. And it's a very poor picture. I apologize, but that's what it looked like when it was on the boat. And I swear to God, it went on once, and that was all. And we fastened it and left. Now, I didn't know what to do up at the top. You have a stem head that was part of the boat. You have the outer rails that were part of the boat that began somewhere in back of the stem head. He wants a cutwater. He's got a budget. You can make this as decorative as you want. I left it long. I said, you can cut it however you'd like it. You know, he's nowhere to be found. There's the cutwater. It's not exactly finished the way I'd like it, but there's always time to do that. But this was the day that the cutwater was installed, so he could use the boat. And he could. I think he wound up painting it until that season was over. But he got the sharp stem, and he's dry now. So I'd have to consider it a success. See, we finished so early we had to take a break. Okay, about 30 seconds with the lights on. I'll get the projector ready. Are there any questions about this? The question is there a void at the keel? I know why there can be. I think if you fill in behind a cutwater, you have to fill it all in because you're just in danger of trapping water. I think if the boat is varnished or painted, and I think if you squeeze some caulking, good caulking, into the holes that you're fastening that with, that all the inside could be free to drain. It's bound to get water in there. It's bound to have condensation. It's bound to, it's asking a lot for a piece of metal to stick to a boat on that kind of surface area. I have personally left them dry on the inside. I also have seen that kind of work, maybe 5 years old, that seems to be fine. Any questions? Oh, up at Homosassa last week, there was a gentleman there that was making cutwaters. And we talked a little bit, and basically what he wants to know is measurements. And he had a nice piece of work there. It was a stainless cutwater. I don't know for what boat it was, but it was plainly a runabout. I think it was $185. This is nice work. And I said, if I were a customer and I wanted to come and have you build a cutwater, what would you have to know? He said, well, I got to have a pattern. I got to know how wide it is at certain points. Simple. That's all we've done here. He basically has a device for producing that blocking and the angles and all of that. And if he's set up to do it, and he's a metal worker, I'm not, I'm a boat builder, so I attack things like, like I can understand personally, and that's probably the way you should too. Don't try to be a boat builder. If you're a dentist or an engineer, work with the skills that you already have. But all he needs to know is the measurements. This should tell you what kind of measurements. You send him the pattern, you've got your numbers on the side, you say the width at number 1 is 2 5/16, the width here is that, and that's all. And then if there's a confusion, you talk again. But again, this is lofting. This is full-size, draw a part of the boat. It's all the same. I see another question somewhere. Okay, now the last part, if you can stand it, is some of Wilson Wright's transparencies of the Chris Craft 19-foot racing runabout. This I would call a presentation copy. It really doesn't tell you much except how pretty the boat looks. This was all intended. All the drawings I'm going to show you were not intended for the public. I mean, wouldn't you like to have been Century and got a hold of this in 1947? Very, very highly guarded proprietary information. As I look at this, I wonder why there's such a difference between the waterline and the boot top, proportionally. I see there's a raked flagpole up front, which may or may not have appeared. I see there's a tiny little flag, which may or may not have appeared. I see there's a rudder design that looks like there's a big cheek piece that's been, somebody's calling attention to it in a presentation copy. You see the general cushion arrangement. You see you can count deck seams. I don't know whether this says scale. Yeah, scale 1.5. I think it looks like 1.5 inches equals 1 foot. Everybody know what that means? 1.5 inches on the drawing equals 1 foot. If the boat is 19 feet long, this is 19 plus half of 19, okay? The drawing, therefore, is 27 something, okay? So if it is to scale, you know how wide the cockpit is. You know how wide the coverboard is, but you don't know where because this drawing doesn't have any stations on it. This is not particularly useful except as presentation. You could believe that the rub rail is this long. I don't know whether I'd believe that it's that wide. You could believe that the front deck looks like that. You notice that the lines just start right here and stop. That's just, again, presentation stuff. It would be very confusing to draw the deck seams in the boat because it would just turn out to be a black deck with all the lines. Any questions on this drawing? I'm sure a lot of you have been mulling this over. I've seen an awful lot of drawings out on tables, so I know that you're all at least interested in some form. You can see the style of deck ventilators that were chosen for this. This drawing is dated. Is it dated? Some of these aren't, some of these aren't. No, but you could research it. This is drawing number B7878. So you go through more drawings, and maybe or maybe not they are consecutive drawings. A lot of these things are just made up at the time. The boss wasn't there to ask what number to put it on. You got to have it by 2 o'clock, and there it goes. But this is all for, I believe, internal use and to try to transmit to the shop and the foreman and everything what this thing was really supposed to look like. There are no initials on this. This, partly presentation, partly deck arrangement. What does it say down here in the bottom? Can't read it. Oh, yeah, okay. Now this is pattern numbers, okay, for what the hardware, where's the hardware going to come from? Pattern number 990, pattern part number so-and-so and so-and-so. It also shows something up top, shows you that there's probably a cylindrical gas tank here. Look, we got a different rudder design this time. Shows you a shaft angle. Shows you location of the cockpits. A little bit of engine hatch framing. This has different deck hardware than the boat we just saw. Somebody that knows more about these little nuances could identify probably a lot more, but I look at it strictly as what the bottom framing is, okay? What the spacing is. This seems to tell you, this gives you the dimension of the engine stringer, the height of the engine stringer at every station, location of the footboard, riser for the seat, riser for the rear seat, location of the gas tank, and it shows that the engine stringer is notched either into or over the bottom frames. but plainly the bottom frame or the floor timber, and it's hard to tell from this drawing, but plainly the stringer is notched somehow, or that joint is notched somehow. It also gives you the spacing between the stations. Okay, you see this slanted line here? See, this is a different spacing. That says that they're using this station. They've tilted this station so that at the same time it picks up the angle of the seat back. All these stations are pretty even, okay, but they come down here and they start getting smaller, and they start getting smaller, and we've gone from 25 and something down to 21, 21 and a half, 24. You see how the deck drops down here pretty good? It'll be pointed out in another drawing. I believe the design started out at something in excess of 20 feet. Now, it could have been that marketing got a hold of it and said, oh no, 20 is too long, nobody wants 20. Got to have something shorter. But the original design is usually evenly spaced, and then you go mess with it, but you don't go back and just change everything. But you can sort of uncover in an archaeological kind of way how a design might have evolved. Okay, now we've got a different deck layout. We've got the red and white. Back to another kind of rudder. Stringers look the same. Spacing looks the same. Deck layout. Now we've got notes on hardware. We've got a lot of notes on hardware. We've also got drawing number. We've got a date of April 23rd, 1947. We've got, I don't know what this says, something drawing, 19-foot racing runabout. We've got all the part numbers, okay? Rudder, material number 002, strut, bow, stern. Okay, somebody in the pattern department has to have this drawing so they know what parts to make. This is a reasonable construction drawing. It is to scale. It is signed also April 23rd, 1947. Things are getting serious now. It looks like we're going to build this thing. Okay, somebody's begun to lay out the deck battens, the king plank, the blocking under the scarf, blocking under the dashboard. Notice that this half of the boat looks different than that half. This is the deck view. This is the bottom view. Bottom view has the chine in it. We started to describe the outer chine and the inner chine. We're looking at the stem and the forefoot underneath. We're looking at half the king plank up above. We're looking at the deck battens in the engine hatch. We're looking at where the battery box is and the floorboards in the engine room. We're looking at this thing, which is at a funny angle, but that's, again, the seat back. So you're looking down on something that's slanted, so it starts to appear to be this shape, but this is tilted in the boat. And you can see that this is a wide piece of wood, and I'm sure those of you that have racing runabouts will verify that there is a landing there for the seat back to fall against. You see in the back, you have no cushion you have no base under the cushion. In the bow you do. You see the slope of the dashboard. You see the height off the stringer. You see the cutaway for the engine. This begins to tell you a 7/16 side planking, 9/16 bottom. You can spend a lot of time reading plans, and that's what they're for, and they do take a long time. So don't expect an instant understanding. It does take time, but what do you got to hurry about? You know, this is learning something. It will take time, but this is totally self-learnable. The transom detail down below says lifting Y filler block. Those of you that know what that little piece of bronze hardware looks like, you've got a piece of hardware that straddles the keel that's threaded at the top that picks up the stern lifting eye, right? And that's what they want to show you. And there's probably a pattern number listed somewhere. But you can also see at parts of the boat, it gets kind of crowded back here. If you're going to try to show details, it's better to just isolate that and go off to somewhere else. Again, these kinds of things are not intended for public consumption, so designers and builders just trade this stuff like, we trade faxes. And this is how they communicate. Yes? Okay. And there was draftsmen that were, employed to use pens and paper and pencils and battens and curves and all of that. And I have a great reverence for that kind of stuff because it is ancient. It has been done for years and years and years. And I'm not one that has subscribed lock, stock, and barrel to this computer business. I have had one boat lofted by a computer. I wonder whether I should be jumping into that because the rest of the world seems to be going by, and here I am, still dwelling in something of the past. But I still believe that the one thing a computer doesn't have is judgment. And the computer cannot see a 20-foot line. The computer operator cannot see a 20-foot line, and he only adjusts curves in very small increments. And that is one major failing. And the boats that we're talking about here, incidentally, are very simple boats. This does not require a computer. If we're talking about America's Cup boats, yes, but we got slightly different budgets. And if you were in the America's Cup business, you'd want to know 16 per. And that's wonderful, but that's a luxury. Sometimes boat shops are lucky and sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they burn. Sometimes the water gets in. And sometimes everything gets lost. Caner. I had an occasion to call them and talk to the owner. I can't remember his name. He said, "Oh yeah, well, we threw those away a long time ago. We didn't think anybody wanted them. The business went down. Blah blah blah." So there's the other way. You throw them away. You're always sorry when that kind of record disappears. So even though your next door neighbor might have it, if he's just got it stuck in his house, maybe it's worth taking it over to Reprographics place and just get a copy of it. What would it hurt? I make Mylars and I make Mylar copies and I put them in two different places. Wooden Boat sells some of my plans. Mystic Seaport has a set. I have a set. I don't believe in secrecy. I believe that none of us is as smart as all of us, and the more we all know, the better everything's going to work out. I work for some very secretive people that if I knew the lines of their boat, and I also have done proprietary work where this stuff will not travel, but there's so much to learn, and boats are readily copyable. They're almost indefensible. It's impossible to copyright. This is a very interesting drawing, and now it's dated. We're into July 3rd, 1947. So now it's looking serious. We got to get to the loft floor. We've got to transmit real accurate measurements, and this is what happens. This is what a boat builder would need to deal with. He would also be very pleased to have a table of offsets, which was probably included with this. Again, for the sake of simplicity, these lines aren't all solid. They're basically dotted lines showing shape change. It's another view. All three views that we talked about with the bananas are right here. Okay, the profile view is the long view up here. The half breadth of the waterline view is right here. And the body plan, which is the slice of bread, is right here. That's all you need. Now, in a typical drawing, these are not superimposed. These are arranged on a sheet of paper so that this vertical is also that vertical. Okay, so that this baseline is level to this water line and is level to this center line. So that if you have a parallel rule or a sliding rule in a triangle, you can work all over the drawing and take all your dimensions. Now, everybody's probably seen the other boat that's superimposed on top of this, which looks suspiciously, and I'm quite convinced it is a 21-foot Cobra. You see that? See the dotted line? Okay, and that's real stuff, my friends. This is the shear of a 21-foot Cobra, and there's the shear up there, and here's the nose, okay? So, if I were just thinking about archaeological boat building, I would say that there is a relationship between a 21-foot Cobra and a 19-foot racing runabout. And I'd say that this is proof. Now, whether it amounted to anything, I don't know. But yesterday, Mr. Feist put forth the idea that they are probably related. We know that the Cobra succeeded the racing runabout as a model with Chris Craft. This is a 1947 drawing. Somebody went back to the drawer, or maybe somebody was fooling around with it in 47, or 48 or 49, just said, I think I'll go back and do that. And that's how one design becomes another. So I think this is a particularly telling drawing. So I appreciate you sticking with me this morning. I would like to acknowledge one of my teachers here, Bruce Barnard, who I've had the pleasure to work with, a very entertaining pleasure to work with. And the thing will continue as long as we have people that are willing to learn and pass it on. And if you've learned anything here, please go home and tell somebody, okay? Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Ken? I know it's... Yes, sir, in the back.
It's been my experience that the lifting rings are there to lift the boat. When it's lifted in the boathouse, timbers are slid under the keel, blocked up in about 3 places, and then the tension is relaxed. They're also used, I should say, to suspend a boat in the water while it's swelling up. I can't answer you time. It's got something to do with the condition of the boat and so on and so forth, and maybe restorers and you owners. See, I'm not an owner, but maybe owners can say what the lifting rings are best used for, but I knew they are designed to lift the boat. Chris is saying that there was a 26-foot, the model, Chris? 26-foot Continental twin engine that stayed suspended in a boathouse with no support from underneath for a year at a time? About 5 years. Okay. It's got something to do with how tough the boat is, too. And don't forget to pull the plug when you lift the boat up. Okay? Might as well let the water drain out. Yes? I think it depends on how much time you have to devote to school. I think it depends on what kind of boat that you're interested in, because the schools, by definition, are kind of a homogeneous educational experience. different parts of the country are going to spend time teaching you boats indigenous to that area. I happen to think that self-motivation is very powerful. And I think there's plenty of written material. I think there's many people that you could go to when you're in a jam. But it certainly wouldn't hurt to write to schools. I personally tried to go to school, but it was in the middle 60s, late 60s. There was one school. Actually, I didn't try to go to school. I was done with school. But I tried to learn something. I figured I'd go someplace to learn something. And I found the Harvey Gamage being built up in Maine. As the years have passed, we call it heavy damage. But Harvey Gamage was being built. There was 18 people working on the boat. They were all living in Volkswagen buses and tents, and one was being paid. And 17 were working for free. And all I had was a car, and I couldn't play. So it was wooden boats in the 60s were just about the most depressed industry that you could find. And my mother would say to me, "What? You think you can make a living at this? Can't you look around? Can't you see what kind of life you're in store for?" So here I am, Ma.
Okay, thank you, Ken.
Thanks for listening. Copyright 1995 by the Antique Boat Museum and the Antique and Classic Boat Society. Audio copyright 2019, Freedom Boat Service, LLC.